I got home last night, took Banks for a walk, and I was listening to Bomani Jones's pod, and he had on Mina Kimes. And so they spent, 15 minutes on this story and about the Eagles. And I'm listening to this, and I was thinking, you know what? It probably does deserve a full segment, even if, admittedly, I want to use
Enjoy
this
it.
to, like, yes, of course, they're a rival.
The thing I kept having to tell myself as I was reading this article was, this is an NFL franchise. Like,
It is indeed.
This isn't like some high school in Indiana. This is a relationship between the quarterback and the head coach of a team that was in the Super Bowl recently, and it is this dysfunctional.
Yeah, and so let me read a couple excerpts. But before I do, the reason why I came away from the pod saying, you know what, I want to talk about this tomorrow with Jimmy, was that I think it was Bomani who brought this up. He pointed out, like, the timing of this is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, exactly.
And I am someone who, just like the inside baseball of journalism and when and where stories drop, I think tells a story almost as much as the story itself,
It's
right? It's like
as important as what's in the content.
So
absolutely.
He said something like, if this story would have dropped in January, it would have made sense that it would have dropped in January because it would have been right after the season, and we would have all been like, oh, wow.
Oh, that's what happened. Yeah.
But, Jimmy, this story dropped on August the 7th. 1 month from today is the first full Sunday. So the 6th, which we've already passed now, that was a month until the first Eagles game. So why is there this story? And by the way, the writers of this, Jeremy Fowler and Tim McManus, they had a double byline on this story titled "Eagles Look to Bridge Nick Sirianni Jalen Hurts Divide." And so why this is the jumping off point for the story? Why does it come out now, a month before the season starts? And so I start thinking of who wanted this story to come out. And the obvious angle is Jalen Hurts wanted this story to come out because it is laying the groundwork for his frustration with what happened last year and why and where that disconnect kind of began and where it leaves the Eagles right now.
We kind of brought this up in Buy or Sell last night because the article starts with Nick Sirianni talking about, hey, everything that happened last year is on me. And that's clearly not the case. Like, it's probably a lot. How much, like, if we're talking, we don't know what's going on in the inner workings of that franchise every day, but from the outside looking in, what percentage do you put on Nick Sirianni versus the rest of the field?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. And it's a hard question to answer in some ways, because on one hand, like, there are 53 men on the roster. There are all the assistants. So it's like everyone deserves some blame. On the other, like, he did hire the coordinators, and from the reporting in the story from McManus and Fowler, he had a ton of fingerprints on the offense and why some of the things changed. So I definitely think the mood souring in the way in which it did. Like, did you put a percentage on it last night?
I think I said 60-40 just because he is the head coach and the book starts with.
Good. Because I was going to say it's definitely above 50%.
Yeah.
So I
think
think I think we're talking about something like that. You're right though.
But back to your statement about him hiring the coordinators and stuff, because obviously, Shane Steichen is a really good coach. Like, I don't even think that even.
Yeah, he's if you don't, for those of you
he
who
was the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, so 2021, Nick Sirianni, his first year, he calls plays for I don't remember how long, half the season maybe. They're struggling on offense. Things aren't going very well. They give the play calling duties to Shane Steichen. The Eagles go on a nice run. They make the playoffs. They lose. The next year, huge breakthrough. They trade for A.J. Brown. A lot of stuff changes, and they are an incredibly difficult offense to stop. But then Shane Steichen goes to the Colts, and last year,
they were really good in Indianapolis,
dude. Especially Gardner Minshew, their first round quarterback gets hurt. He has concussions and shoulder issues, and he looks to be a very good hire. They also, of course, lost their defensive coordinator after the Super Bowl run, in Jonathan Gannon,
who's also really good.
Yeah, and he's now and it was funny because he was someone that Eagles fans were like deuces, like they were so excited for him to go, and I thought his defense was very, very good in 2022.
But I mean, the reason I kind of take a little, like, I tend to pull the reins up a little bit on burying Nick Sirianni for a guy that probably deserves it for his personality, and it'd be easy to do so, is like they tried. If this article is to be believed 100%, and obviously what I'm about to say is obviously true, but they went on, you get Jalen Hurts, a guy that he's comfortable with and has been around for the better part of 20 years, and they tried making sure that relationship was as close to Jalen Hurts personally as they possibly could have. And when you go out and you get a guy in Brian Johnson who was with him in high school and
I didn't realize how far back that relationship went. I found that very interesting.
And that's the guy they went out and got. Like, it's hard for me to look at Jalen Hurts calling an audible on a play that decides a game and go against what Nick Sirianni originally called, and then for Jalen Hurts to say, well, it's on Nick Sirianni and I don't have my guy calling plays, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which is not what was said, but was alluded to. Like, it's hard for me to go, okay, well, then that's all on Nick Sirianni.
And did you know, and Bomani Jones was talking about this on the podcast yesterday, The Right Time. His dad, Jalen Hurts' dad, he is a quarterback coach. And
I did know that.
And so he coached Brian Johnson, among a lot of other really good high school coaches in the state of Texas. And so all of that to say, like, Jalen Hurts, his dad, they know good quarterbacks. They know good quarterback coaching. And so, I mean, I think it's so obvious reading this story that they do not believe in Nick Sirianni. I want to read a paragraph where the authors write, things were off, including between the head coach and quarterback. ESPN spoke with several sources who detailed a prolonged strain between Hurts and Sirianni during the 23 campaign, with one source with direct knowledge of the dynamic describing the relationship as fractured and unhealthy last season. At the root of the divide, a disconnect of offensive visions with what a team source described as a lack of full respect for Sirianni's X's and O's chops. Lack of full respect for the X's and O's chops.
The thing that stood out to me the most in this article, and I think it's in that very next paragraph, the unlisted Eagles source said they're not good in one-on-one situations.
Yeah, I know, man.
That's what stood out to me the most. We're talking about the franchise quarterback that you just gave $255 million to for a 5-year deal, and the head coach of your franchise that just went to a Super Bowl 2 years ago.
Yeah.
They can't sit in a room and have a one-on-one conversation together. That is not a recipe for success.
How about this? And I know this got some run yesterday, and it's a little lengthy, but just fascinating stuff. It says, with the playoffs approaching and the hunt for improvement unending, Hurts made an unusual move. He called former Giants defensive coordinator Wink Martindale, who had parted ways with New York following Week 18. So time-wise, Eagles play the Giants in the final week of the season. It's a game on the road. Horrible conditions. Hurts messes up one of his middle finger. He gets injured in that game. They lose. They end up losing the division. Wink Martindale, he had a whole host of issues.
Him and Brian Dable
they hated each other, and they part way. So this is Week 18. He calls him that week, and then they're going to have their playoff game on Monday night. Back to the story. I've been doing this for 40 years, said Martindale, now the defensive coordinator at the University of Michigan. And it's the first time I've had an opposing quarterback call me up. I thought it was pretty cool that the guy called. It shows you what kind of pro he really is. He's just looking at every angle that he can to get better. The phone call lasted about an hour. Martindale told ESPN. They discussed weaknesses in Philadelphia's protection and how New York tried to game plan him. Quote, it was very effective and he knew it, and he just wanted to know why we did certain things that we did. Then he went to work on that, end quote. Obviously, we know what happens. The Eagles have a horrible offensive performance. Again, they lose to the Bucs, and they're one and done in the playoffs. So he calls a coordinator. And, going back to what we mentioned earlier, Jimmy, lack of full respect for Sirianni's X's and O's. Then he calls Martindale, and he's trying to get the skinny on, hey, how are you defending us? You know that the question is, how are you defending the offense? Not, hey, how did you defend me?
Right.
What's going on with this offense that seems not very good in your eyes?
And I kind of got raked over the coals about this last year because when the Eagles went to the run of the Super Bowl, because I was like, there's no way you can have your bread and butter play. Like, when you need some yards, be a quarterback sneak. I just never thought,
it worked.
but again, it did, but it was like, okay, what happens when it stops working though? Cause it didn't really feel like there was a whole lot else there in short yardage situation that offense felt comfortable running. There was a reason.
But it was an automatic play.
It was. And when your quarterback can squat 9,000 Volkswagens, that helps.
For sure.
But it was one of those things that it never felt like if it wasn't going to be automatic, if there was a situation where it was a bad snap, Jalen tripped, somebody stepped on him, whatever, they didn't have any other answer outside of that. And it kind of felt like this offense was scheming. Now, when you add A.J. Brown to the equation, that obviously opens up a lot of different things. But when your dad's a coach and you've been around it and you get the feeling that you're the smartest guy in the room, but you're in a situation where you have to listen to somebody else, it's never a good feeling where you feel like you know more, especially in a coach player situation where you're maybe something's coming into your headset and you're like, okay, well, I know that's not going to work. It's probably a really weird situation.
It certainly is. They were last year they were going into the season an obvious pick to continue to play really well.
Start 10-1.
It's a loaded roster, right? They were 10-1 before the 49ers game, and they melted down. They only won one game after that the entire rest of the year. And man, like I wonder if this is a real potential pick to fall apart. And like obviously I am rooting for that. I think that there is a list item. There's a list item that I have on there somewhere that Sirianni is going to get fired in season. And I guess
I don't hate that pick.
One more thing to put a bow on this discussion.
His personality doesn't help him. Like,
for sure.
He had his nose thumbed up at everybody after they made their Super Bowl run.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you got two coordinators that got really good situations to go elsewhere, but none of them really felt like they were like, oh man, we're not going to be under the tutelage of Nick Sirianni.
Well, that's
anymore.
the thing, man. Like the brain drain of losing two coordinators in back-to-back seasons. And last year it happened in the middle of the season, right? Yep. They move away from Sean Desai and they go with Pencil with the laminated cheat boy to be their coordinator at the very end of the season.
That's his government name, folks.
Yeah, and so like I don't know. I certainly think that it's very much on the table, but my broad takeaway, or maybe my last takeaway from reading the story, is like it is wild that they brought him back because this is laying the groundwork for them.
Because it felt like they weren't going to.
Yeah. And I really thought that they were going to move on, and like they did make the playoffs. They were a game away from winning the division again. Like so, I understand why you
There's
can talk
parameters that would tell you otherwise.
I understand why you can talk yourself into like why would we want to get rid of this guy? They were still a playoff team. They were still a good football team, even if they melted down. On the other hand, like if you know something is rotten at the core,
if your franchise quarterback is telling you so.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like they've already signed Jalen Hurts. They've made their choice on who the future is. And the future is not Sirianni.
He didn't do him any favors at his opening press conference either, too. When they're like, "Well, how's Nick Sirianni kind of evolved?" He's like, that's kind of tough to say. I don't think he has.
That's how the story begins. One more on this, like what kind of quarterback do you think Hurts is moving forward? Like he was so good in 2022. That is inarguable. But, his game is definitely built on when he is on the field, it is 11-on-11 football because of his mobility. Mm-hmm. But when he loses even a little bit of that mobility, like he did last year, he was banged up the year before. So he's been banged up now in each of the last two seasons. It changes his game quite a bit. Like I think that this is quite the year for him in terms of like fork in the road, like, can he get back to that 22 form and do that all the time? Or we've seen Jimmy a million times in the NFL. A quarterback have a really good year. And that's kind of what they are, right? Like where it's like, whoa, that guy was awesome that year. And other times they're good, but they're not. I mean, he was an MVP candidate. If he doesn't get hurt, he wins the MVP in 2022.
Well, and there's a couple other variables too, right? You're losing Jason Kelce for the first time in his career
huge,
too,
man.
and you've got you're replacing one other piece on that offensive line. I mean, he's got his weapons back, but there's going to be a lot of different voices again from the offensive coordinator standpoint as well. So I mean, it's not necessarily can you put Jalen Hurts into this box and this is who he's going to be? Is he going to be good or he's not? There's a lot of other question marks outside of just him that you have to answer about that team this year. But from a guy who was as humble as he was at Alabama and going to Oklahoma and seems like he does things the right way. Like that's kind of been the most staggering part about this whole thing to me is never came on. He had every opportunity in the world to throw Nick Saban and Alabama under the bus and the whole Tua situation and always took the high road. And there was some question marks about what happened in Norman too. And he just had nothing but positive things to say. And for that guy to be having this type of situation, how bad is it? Like it's got to be really, really bad.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. A couple comments real fast. Wade says, I honestly hate Philly and do not pay attention to them in the offseason, but I did not know until today they did not fire him. I thought it was a foregone conclusion. Yeah, so they...
I want you to understand, we're not kidding either.
Yeah. So go back to the end of the season, and they had some meetings, and it was within, 3 days maybe, and they decided to bring him back, but they forced coordinator changes, and so, look, Vic Fangio is their new DC. He has a history of being a very good defensive coordinator. Kellen Moore is their OC. As a Cowboys fan, I can tell you, does
not feel like a guy that's going to be able to fix this situation from a personality standpoint.
I think he is fine. His offenses always peaked before December, and that was a big problem for his offenses. Is they got stagnant late.
You put that on him?
He's the play caller.
Yeah,
if every year the offense has the same issues, the run game disappears late. The routes that the receivers are running
Did Dallas
aren't
not
sexy.
have that problem at the end of the season last year?
No, the offense was fine at the end of last year, except for the playoff game. But I'm talking about the month of December.
Okay.
His offenses were bad. Corey writes, so petty, Josh. I hope the Cowboys go 0-17. Look, I'm just reading from this story. It's a very interesting story.
And I could see how somebody would take that take with you wearing the shirt and the hat you are today. But like for somebody that is just an outsider looking at this that doesn't have a rooting interest on either side, this is a wild situation, man. Like out of everything I took away from this, like that is what I took away the most is this is something that is happening in an NFL locker room right now, and it's like for a franchise that had the ability and the discussion about firing this head coach.
They did indeed.